We don't lash out because we are bad leaders. We lash out because we are human. And part of becoming a great leader is learning how to interrupt that reaction. We don't want to react. We want to respond thoughtfully. Hi, and welcome back to Reflect Forward. I'm your host, Kerry Siggins, and I'm so glad you are here today. Today, I want to talk about why it's important to make friends and not enemies, and the leadership power of compassion, forgiveness, and long-term thinking, especially when it comes to your relationships. Now, we have all burnt bridges in our life, and we've probably all looked back and regretted burning a bridge or two in life. I did this early on in my career when I left my job right after college and moved to Austin. I burnt a bridge. I was lost. I was struggling. I did not like my job, even though I loved my boss. And he asked me right before I left to make sure that I did this one project. And I didn't do it. I didn't fully understand how to do it. And I was too ashamed to say, I don't know how to do this. And I was just a mess anyway. It was when I was struggling with my substance abuse issues. And so I didn't finish the project and I left. And then when I went to Austin, I used him as a reference because I had worked with him. He was my first real job boss. And I didn't ask him. And so when Eaton, the company that I worked for many years when I went to Austin, the one that prepared me for my job here at Stone Age, when they called for a reference check, he gave me a good reference, but he called me and he was furious with me. He said, "You left me without finishing your project. You used me as a reference without asking, and you're lucky I gave you a good reference. Don't ever do that again." And I am so incredibly grateful for him because he taught me such a valuable lesson that burning those bridges is never a good thing. And thank goodness he knew I was struggling and he knew I had potential and he still helped me out, even though he didn't have to. I didn't deserve it. It was a very, very powerful lesson. Never, ever burn a bridge. And so I have spent my career trying never to burn bridges, never to just blow things up. And I've done a decent job for most of my career, but there's some times that I have villainized certain situations to make myself feel better. And I've judged and gossiped about people when I knew that wasn't the right thing to do, right? I mean, we're all human. Those are the things that we do. And every time I do that, I learn something about myself in that situation and why I don't want to do that. And I certainly have witnessed many people burn bridges. Lots of people will leave a company and they will go out guns a-blazing and later regret it when they want to come back to the company, or later regret it when they need a reference check and the company doesn't want to do it, or regret it when they have to go out into the community and that teammate that they were gossiping about or really blamed or victimized in that situation, now they're in the same friend circle. There's all of these things that come around and we never know how they're going to come around. In life and leadership, relationships are everything. And the way we treat people when things go wrong defines our character and our future opportunities. This is all work that we need to do as human beings. And I think that it's more important than ever that we really focus on making friends, not enemies, that we think about compassion and forgiveness and think in the long term, because we need more love and happiness in this world, not anger and blaming and victimization. It's just not a great way to live. And it doesn't bring people together. And that's what we leaders are here to do, to bring people together, or to lead by example, and to really make sure that we talk the talk and walk the walk when it comes to relationship building. So as we go through this podcast today, I implore you to think about, what if your enemy today is your ally tomorrow? What would you do? How would that relationship change? I know that I have friends in my life who I didn't like when I first met them, and I am so incredibly grateful that they're in my life because I didn't turn them into an enemy, and now they are allies. Same thing with colleagues that I've spent years and years working with. It's easy to say, I don't like that person, but what if they're your ally tomorrow? That's a really important question. And the second question I implore you to ponder as we go through this podcast is, what does it really mean to lead with ownership and compassion when things get messy? Because let's face it, we're humans and we love to make messes of our relationships. And I've learned that it always takes two people in any messy relationship that causes it to get there, even if one person is more responsible for the mess. We all have to look at ourselves and say, how could I make this situation better? And how do I lead with compassion, even though this is kind of an icky situation? And as leaders, we're going to be facing that all the time. When you have to give tough feedback, when you have to fire an employee, when an employee leaves, when a mistake happens and you have a really upset customer, right? There's so many opportunities to turn conflict into something great, or to let conflict fester into something that's really negative, then it damages or destroys the relationship. And we don't want that. Even if it's going to be with people that we never see again, who exit out of our life, it's still so important not to burn those bridges, because you don't know how it's going to circle back in the future. And you want to lead with character. What kind of person do you want to be when things get messy? So let's jump into our default reaction, why we want to burn bridges when things get messy. We're hurt, we're blindsided, we're betrayed. And in these high stakes business situations, our amygdala, our brain's fear center, kicks into gear, and it activates that fight or flight response, which floods us with cortisol and adrenaline. And in that moment, we lose access to our executive function, which is the part of our brain that's responsible for empathy, perspective, and future thinking. Therefore, we lash out. And we lash out because it is instinctual. It is a form of self-protection. But here's the leadership problem. Reacting from this place leads to regret. Almost always. Like I've said in a million podcasts before, freaking out never makes anything better. It really, really doesn't. And especially when you are in a leadership position. When we act from a place of pain rather than purpose, we damage trust, we erode our influence, and sometimes we sabotage our own long-term success. People can't trust us. They don't want to work with us. We're not consistent in how we show up. And that is not being a leader worth following. But here's the thing. We don't lash out because we are bad leaders. We lash out because we are human. And part of becoming a great leader is learning how to interrupt that reaction. We don't want to react. We want to respond thoughtfully. And I love this quote by Viktor Frankl. He wrote the book, A Man's Search for Meaning. It is one of the most powerful books I've ever read. I highly recommend you read it. And he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And that space is our power to choose our response. That is so important. How do you give yourself that pause? When you want to lash out, take a deep breath, respond, not react. And trust me, I have felt that urge. When I have had that instant reaction, I want to send a crappy email. I want to make a smart-ass comment. I want to slam the door. But I've learned to ask, what am I actually feeling beneath this anger? And usually it's disappointment, fear, sadness, or bruised ego. And fundamentally, what all of these emotions come down to is that we have these needs that need to be met, whether we're conscious of them or not. And when those needs aren't met, we react. We jump into that space of the amygdala hijack because we're afraid. It is how we justify burning down a relationship, and that is not effective. None of those reasons justify burning down a relationship. So now let's go into why this happens in business, why we turn competitors into enemy number one. Since the earliest days of business education, we're taught that competition is war. Think market share, crushing the competition, dominating the space. I have absolutely used this language throughout my career as well. But what this language does is it subtly teaches us that every interaction is win-lose. And every interaction is not win-lose. In fact, we should be looking to make interactions win-win as much as possible. It does not have to be a zero-sum game. And when we go into a zero-sum game, it's because we're coming from a scarcity mindset, which is the belief that there is a finite amount of success, opportunity, and recognition available. When a competitor wins, we think we've lost. When an employee leaves, we feel abandoned. When someone challenges us, we feel threatened. And that's the scarcity mindset at work. I recall a time many years ago when a competitor landed a big account that we were really going for at Stone Age. My first reaction is I was angry. And I went into this mindset of I want to beat them next time. What did they do that we didn't? How can we undermine their value prop? And it just led to a toxic place. I made some decisions in business that were dumb because I wanted to win. And I learned some really tough lessons, some very expensive lessons because of that. Now, if I get that feeling, which of course I still do, right? I'm a competitive person and I want to win and I love my company and I think that we make the best products that are out there. And when we lose a sale to a competitor, it's like, but I pause and I remind myself, we don't need to win every time to be successful. But now what I do is I pause and remind myself, we don't need to win every time. Maybe, just maybe, that customer will come back to us. Maybe, just maybe, that competitor will wind up partnering with us some way in the future, which is actually happening right now. And that mental shift from scarcity to possibility changes everything in how I choose to respond. Scarcity tells us to hoard, to protect, to attack, and ownership tells us to play the long game. That is why it's so important for us to understand these default reactions and pause, so that way we don't hold on to that anger. Like the Buddha said, I think this quote came from the Buddha, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That's what we do when we hang on to these things and we burn bridges and we damage relationships instead of pausing and saying, how do I want to show up in this? How is this going to reflect my character? And how do I be sure not to burn those bridges? So now let's talk about why it's smarter to keep bridges intact. Well, first, there's this idea of the law of unexpected returns. You never know when someone is going to walk back into your life. The kindness and respect and grace that you might offer today might come back to you years later in ways that you never could have predicted. I absolutely have seen this. My best friend from college, we were so close. We were so incredibly tight. We went through really tough years together after college in substance abuse, and we parted ways. I didn't try, and I blamed her for a lot of things. And then just a couple of years ago, literally like 20 years after we graduated college, I reached out to her on her birthday and said, happy birthday. And she was like, oh my gosh, I miss you so much. And we reconnected, and I talk to her every couple of months. She's come out to see me. I've gone to see her. And our friendship has rekindled in such a profound way. And I'm so glad that neither one of us held our past against us, because we did burn that bridge. And now this friendship is so incredibly valuable to me again. And I'm so glad that we came back to each other. And that is the power of unexpected returns. I never thought that she was going to be back in my life. So imagine what happens if the employee who you treated with compassion during their exit refers a top performer to you a few years later. What if it's a vendor? That vendor you didn't ghost, even when you declined their bid, becomes your champion for a future deal? What if that competitor that you congratulated after losing an account to ends up inviting you to collaborate later? In business, your reputation is currency. People remember how you made them feel, especially when they were vulnerable. And because industries are so small and so interconnected, those returns often surface when you least expect them. There have been many times where I have chosen to extend kindness or even just keep things neutral, even when I felt disappointed or frustrated or angry. And I've been amazed how those people have circled back into my life, often in ways that open doors that I didn't even know I need. Remember, you never know how things are going to come back around. Assume that they're going to come back around in a positive way. And that is why it's smarter to keep bridges intact. So now let's talk about what happens when it gets hard, not to burn a bridge, and why it's still worth it. First, compassion doesn't mean tolerating bad behavior. Absolutely not. You can be compassionate for a person and still have boundaries. It means that you are refusing to carry resentment or judgment against that person, even when things are tough. Now, boundaries, that can be triggering to somebody. That can be like, oh, I can't have that person in my life. No. Compassion means that you have boundaries, but that doesn't mean that you are unkind or cold. It just means, hey, I'm not tolerating this. This is what I'm available for. This is what I'm not available for. This is what I'm good with. This is what I'm not good with. Those are boundaries, and you don't have to be mean or cold about it. You can just be honest. Your integrity isn't just based on the things that you say and do when things are going well. It's who you are and what you say when things aren't going well. Just because the relationship looks like this now doesn't mean that it's going to look like this forever. So be compassionate, have empathy, don't judge, have your boundaries, speak your truth. But remember, things will get better. This is just a moment in time, and approaching the situation with compassion and empathy and a lack of judgment will allow that relationship to get back on track faster. So now let's talk about how you stay compassionate in conflict. First, pause before reacting. Ask yourself, what story am I telling about this person right now? We all tell ourselves stories, we all make assumptions, and oftentimes those assumptions are incorrect. So come up with 3 alternative stories about what could be going on. Pause. Do not burn that bridge. Consider what might be happening and approach it with compassion, empathy, and curiosity. Number 2, assume positive intent. Always, always, always assume that somebody has good intentions, not that they're purposely trying to hurt you or sabotage you or whatever story you have told yourself. Even when you're hurt, assume positive intentions. Even if it's hard, assume positive intentions. This alone will make your life so much better. Taking things personally, it's just, it doesn't make your life better. It just makes you upset, and usually it's not actually about you. Number 3, when you're in conflict, use I statements. This is very important. When you use I statements, you stay grounded in your truth instead of blame. When you say, you did this, that's making a big assumption. Instead, say, this is how I experienced this. Those I statements are really important. Number 4, reach out, even if it's awkward. Staying silent, ignoring the situation, trying to sweep it under the rug, not helpful. Have the courage to reach out. Saying something kind, being curious and asking questions, it can shift everything. So don't be afraid to reach out and initiate that conversation. And then finally, number 5, think 5 years ahead. Will this moment matter in 5 years? Probably not. Will you be proud of your response in 5 years? Not if you burn a bridge. What would this relationship look like if I didn't burn this bridge? How could it come back around to either bite me or to be beneficial in my life? Always have the future state in mind. So as we wrap things up, I'd like to outline the key takeaways from this podcast. Number 1, lashing out is human, but leadership requires restraint. Your brain is wired to protect you in conflict, but true leadership is about choosing intention over reaction. Number 2, business is not a zero-sum game. The scarcity mindset makes enemies out of peers, competitors, and even team members. But remember, there's more than enough success to go around. Number 3, your reputation travels farther than you think. How you treat people when things go wrong will define how people talk about you when you're not in the room. Number 4, the law of unexpected returns is real. Grace, kindness, and professionalism will come back to you, sometimes even years later, in ways that you can't predict. Make sure they're going to come back to you in a positive way. And then finally, number 5, relationships evolve. Just because a relationship is strained today doesn't mean that it's over. It doesn't mean that it's going to be this way forever. Leave the door open, even if it's only for a crack. Think about my best friend from college. I'm so grateful that she's in my life, and we left that door open a crack, and now our friendship is rekindled. How important is that? So my call to action to you today is to think of one relationship, past or present, where you've been tempted to burn a bridge. And then ask yourself these questions. How do I want this relationship to feel 5 years from now? What's one small action I can take to shift towards neutrality or maybe even empathy today? Then do it. Send a message. Let go of that resentment. Pause before reacting. Lead with ownership and long-term thinking, because great leaders don't make enemies. They make space for redemption. All right, that's the end of today's episode, and I will leave you to your day. If you think someone could benefit from this podcast, please share it with them. And if you like this podcast overall, please subscribe to it on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. Share it with a friend, write a review, send me a comment. I always appreciate the support and hearing from you. Have a great day. We'll see you next week.